songs, and those became the demo tapes, which got sent out, to various record companies unsolicited, and we just got lucky as far as that goes. But the name came about, I think 1999. This was before I had a home computer with the internet on it. So we would get in my 1987 Toyota Tercel hatchback, drive around Stillwater, Oklahoma, which is a very small town. You can drive around the whole town in like 10 minutes. And each time we would pass the record store, we would go inside, and they had like this kiosk where you could type in like a band or a record and see if they had it in stock. So we would just type in band names, and if anything came up, it meant that it was taken and, being used. So the first thing we came up with, there was a song we had at the time. There was a lyric like All American something with like kind of a negative connotation to it, like self-deprecating. And somebody, I think Tyson said, let's try rejects. And we typed it into the little kiosk computer, and huzzah, it was not taken. So that was it. It's kind of like getting a tattoo, we came up with it a long time ago, and we said, yes, that's what we want. And then here we are 25 years later, and it's part of us, but we're kind of stuck with it at the same time.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because like your story on that is kind of like I understand where you're coming from, but like today's world, and I'm sure there are bands out there that do it, but it's like now they can just go on to like random generator, and then it's just like, let's put in some words that we like, and let's see. And then it's like crash test dummies or something. They're like, that's actually taken. It's like, all right, let's try it again. And it's like crash test morons. That's
I
us.
love the crash test dummies. Oh man! Speaking of Canada and crash test dummies, we worked with a guy named Greg Wells once, who's talk about talented Canadians, like musical genius. Like this guy can run circles around anybody on any instrument. He said he used to work with the crash test dummies back in Canada, and he always said that their family would call and be like, hey, how's the taping going? And I was like, yes, that's the most Canadian I've ever heard. How's the taping going?
Yeah, it's just, there's so many Canadian references that you hear in the States, like now either mocking us or just more or less like, oh, it's like, we're not really mocking you, we just think it's really polite. And I'm like, that's fair. But I think it's like, I feel like Jim Carrey is the embodiment of Canada in the sense of like when you see his stand up or you see how he presents himself, it's almost like it's not even like him anymore. It's almost like it's not even Jim just being Jim. It's almost like, guys, I got to represent Canada here as well. And I feel like with Mike Myers, it's the same thing. Maybe all Canadians, like Martin Short and a whole bunch. It's like when they do interviews, it's like, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm like, you didn't even cut him off. He was done the question.
They can't just be themselves. They have to like represent like an entire group of people. Yeah, that's got to be daunting, man.
Yeah. I want to ask you too, because when you were talking about now you being also involved in the drums, like don't sell yourself short, because I feel like there's a lot of credit in terms of you, I think, produced, edited, mastered your first ever like kind of demo and got that sent off, and then it went from there. But the most interesting story I like about that is like, it's a go-getting world, even in the 90s. But I like how like today's
even more
world.
So I feel.
Yeah. Well, you have TikTok and Instagram now and a whole bunch of social media where literally like, in the case of a Shawn Mendes or a Bieber, you upload things and get it in the right views. Where back then, I feel like it's harder back then.
Well, it's certainly harder to get a wide audience back then, but I suppose the amount of work is probably similar, because I know a lot of artists, I work with a lot of new artists from like a songwriting production standpoint, and they're always like struggling, trying to figure out how to get traction on things like TikTok and stuff. And sometimes it has to do with their music. Sometimes it has nothing to do with their music, but it sounds like a lot of work. Yeah. And I would not survive as an artist, as a 40-year-old man nowadays. But I put in the work in different ways, I suppose, because we recorded our own music and it didn't stop there. We then had to figure out how to get it onto some sort of format. So you have to burn the CDs, you have to design the artwork, you have to go to Kinko's, I guess FedEx office now. It used to be called Kinko's back in the 1900s. and we would print out all the inserts. We would, use their paper slicer and, make all the inserts and stuff all the CDs. And then we would have to make flyers for shows and go staple up flyers for shows. So it's the same kind of promotion. It's just on a much more localized scale, I suppose. It's an equal amount of work. Like I remember skipping school and missing work and doing, just focusing on promoting a show. And what that used to mean was like go hand out flyers and like staple shit to telephone poles.
Yeah. I like Dirty Little Secrets. And I mean, even to this day, I know that they got down. Give You Hell was like your most successful song to date, peaking at number 4 on like I think it's like the Hot Billboard 100 or whatever. But like, I will always argue with people where it's like, yes, I'm not debating that they don't have better songs. They obviously do, but this is my go-to. If someone was like, all right, name me an All-American Rejects song, I'd be like, Dirty Little Secrets, boom, done. And then there'd be like 5, like people like, how did you not think of Move Along or this? I'm like, listen, still impactful. This is just where my brain goes because I think of me being the MP3 kid running around the block going like, this is my jam. This is the happiest I'm ever going to have in my life. No.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, thanks, man.
But I want to ask you, like, do you get that sometimes with people when like, if they walk up to you or they see you in a concert and they're like, all right, we like this song, but they give you like one that you didn't randomly know. Like you probably think, okay, these are like my top 3 or 4 songs of All American Rejects. And then they toss out a random one. You're like, really? That's your go-to?
Well, it's always a bummer when they're like, this is like, they say, their favorite one, and it's one that like we never play. And I'm like, well, you're not going to hear that one tonight.
I feel like there's like, I bring it up because there was an interview, I think, with, I'm just trying to remember his name from Fall Out Boy. I think it was like, was it Pete? Maybe it was Pete. I'm not sure exactly. Or maybe it was Pat. Yeah. But it was like, they were telling him one time they were doing a concert in Chicago, and one person walked up to them and was like, yeah, it was a great concert. But I didn't like the fact you didn't play the song, and it just kind of kills your whole buzz. But now it was Mark Hoppus interviewing him, and then he kind of made the joke where it's like, so now you know how I felt when you did it to me when we were playing Blink-182, and you walked up to me saying, hey, I loved your concert, but you didn't play the song. And he just kind of laughed at it. And it was like, funny. He's like, totally. But I love that encounter where it was like, you don't even know sometimes your fans actually become artists themselves. And then one day you cross paths. But I just brought it up because I think it would be interesting if a fan came up to you and be like, yeah, well, like Dirty Little Secrets is overrated. And then like 5 years later, it's like you're managing them, and then it's like, yeah, I just want to say I'm sorry that it was totally a cool song at the time. I was just a bummer.
I would not remember that encounter 5 years later. My memory is not what it used to be. I would remember an encounter from 20 years ago. Yeah. Just because like, I was young and those were when all my wrinkles were being made up in my brain. But yeah, there's no more room up there. If that happened 5 years ago, I would not remember.
I want to ask you though, like obviously you've had like a number of albums that are out, but tell me a little bit about like producing that first album and like the success of Swing Swing, because I feel like now when people today, and I believe someone said this in an interview, I think it may be Beyonce, not like recently, but she said like, we don't come out with albums anymore. People don't listen to a body of music. It's like release a single, you listen to it. It's like a drug where it's like, you listen to it. You're like, all right, now more. It's like, do you know how long that artist spent to just make this one? Yeah. Now you're like demanding more, but tell me a little bit about like how happy you were with the success and like just getting over the hump essentially.
I mean, if you look at our discography and the dates that things were released, like the last decade or so, like has been a lot more sparse, and it's been things like singles and EPs just because that's how people consume music nowadays. The first 10 years of our career was putting out 4 albums, and all of them we strived to make an experience to listen to, and we also, we had 4 unique experiences creating them. That was back when you would take a year to just write an album, and then for us, we would go in the studio. It would depend on who was producing it, and what the workflow was like, but like, our second record took 6 weeks to make. Our third record took 9 months. So
Wow.
you could spend, the better part of another year making the album. And after you've put 1 to 2 years into something, you're kind of spent. So then you go on the road and you don't write at all. All you do is perform and try to sleep when you can.
Yeah.
And that's another year or two. So I guess all that to say, like that first record, making that first record was the beginning of that. We, Tyson and I got in our tour van, which was like a 1993 GMC something or other, like in terrible shape. It had already been on the road. We were weekend warriors playing bars for, a couple of years before that. So this van was trashed, but it got us to New York City. And just to kind of set the scene a little bit, we drove to New York City 2 months after 9/11 to make that first record. So like we didn't, we barely left Oklahoma, Texas area before, and we were driving to New York City after 9/11. We're like, oh my God, like this is insane. Like
Yeah.
we had no idea what we were in for. It ended up being a great experience. I mean, yes, we slept on the producer's floor. Yes, we ate hot dogs for most of our meals because it was cheap. But, every Sunday we got to go into the city and explore. I'd never been to New York before. It was great. I would go to the Virgin Megastore in Times Square, which I think is like a Forever 21 now. It doesn't even exist. But,
Oh,
I
that's
would
sad.
go, I know, I would go and thumb through all the CDs, and like, I would once a week I'd buy like a dozen CDs. That's where all my money went. That's why I was eating hot dogs. And I would just ride the subway with my Discman and just listen to music. And I would, I was digging in like deep into like the like older U2 records and stuff like that, and like discovering the Smiths and that kind of shit. And then, Monday through Saturday, we would go into the back room of a boxing gym and record an album. Like that's where the studio was. Like a lot of times we had to wait if there was a fight or something that was really loud, or if there was like an audience there, like we would have to wait until they were done and then we could record.
I want to ask you too, because I know, like, again, we're gonna go like all over the place, so it's not even like in chronological order. But like, if I have it here in my notes, I know that they're having like this thing in October, an October kind of fest, When We Were Young Fest. Now, to me, I'm not one to get like easily offended or like what's the word, like triggered. But reading that title, When We Were Young, and then seeing the bands, I'm like, are you saying that me as 30? Funny. Like me as 30, that I am now considered old because I don't feel old, and these bands I don't even think are that old, like Paramore, Avril Lavigne, All American Rejects. Like I get it. You mentioned that to like a 17-year-old today, they're like, yeah, I know who Avril Lavigne is because she has songs out or whatever. I've heard of Paramore because of Olivia Rodrigo, but I'm looking at these and I'm like, I don't consider that old. Like rename the festival.
Age is a construct, man. It's, I think as time goes on, like I just turned 40 and I feel like 40 is the new 30. And when I turned 30,
so 30 must be the new 20.
No, exactly. No. Like I was still fucking up and making mistakes at 30. Like it is the new 20.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I guess I didn't think about that because I'm like, okay, I mean, in theory, no, I'm not young anymore. So yeah, When We Were Young, I get it. Like I didn't think twice about it. But yeah, I can see why you were triggered. That's funny.
No, like I get it for like the like even if they called it like the nostalgia tour or something, I'd be like, oh right, because that's what like people in their 30s and late 20s are kind of like, oh, it's like yesterday I was listening to the iHeart 90s radio or iTunes 3000s and I heard this band and that would bring back the nostalgia. I'm like, that makes sense to call it that. But when you're like, When We Were Young, I'm like, hold on a second. It's like, what age gap do you consider me old? But I was looking at it, and this is where I kind of come up with like the whole tour aspect, where they give you, I think it's like 2 nights, or I think it's like 2 nights or 2 weekends in between when they're doing this, but it's all in Vegas, and I'm like, hello, like, can you, I understand that we're all, in this case, they all have their own plans and it's going to be hard to accommodate everybody, but like, couldn't you at least phone Toronto and say, hey, Toronto? And I would have been like, all right, I understand. I'd still go back to like the 10-year-old or the 15-year-old me and be like, plane ticket to Toronto. But at least this one would be worth it because I'm seeing a number of different bands.
I don't know. I don't know what the thinking is with that. I don't know much about the festival. I just know the lineup is insane, and I found out about the lineup the same day that everybody else did. Which
oh
is
wow!
kind of funny.
Okay.
I mean, I knew I was playing it, but I did not know.
Okay, it'd be funny if you didn't know you were playing it. If you just be like, "Here's the lineup," and you'd be like, "I'm there, but no one told me."
Right. I'm sure that's happened before, but
yeah.
But no, I knew about this one. I just wasn't aware of the lineup, and yeah, I don't know what the thinking is with Vegas, but Vegas in October is probably kind of nice. Like it's probably cooling off a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like a lot of people are flying in for that festival, so it should be fun. And we're doing a bunch of shows leading up to it. Not like a proper tour or anything, but everything kind of culminates at that festival in October. It'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah. See, Nick, you just wheeled yourself in a really bad situation because I'm gonna be like, you're gonna do a few tour or a few dates before you go to do this festival, Newfoundland.
I don't think anybody. Well, you know what? It's a two-way street, man. Canada hasn't called me.
All right, that's fair. I will call Canada. I won't call Trudeau. I will just call Canada. I'll look it up and see who.
Tell Canada. Yeah. Tell Jim Carrey to call me.
Yeah. Man, if I could get Jim Carrey, I'd phone Jim and be like, Jim, I've got a number of questions. My first one is, can you get All American Rejects in Canada? Be like, really? That's your first question ever? Not like, how did the Grinch costume work? I'd be like, no, that was number 2. Like, number 2 on my list was like, how much green fur did you have stuffed in your mouth while filming that? And he'd be like, that wasn't your first one.
Did you know that they he underwent the same kind of therapy that like torture victims, like prisoners of war, went through, just because of how long he had to sit to get that makeup on? It was like 14 hours or something just to get the like something insane. Don't quote me on that. I don't know.
Like I've
a lot of fucking hours.
I've definitely seen clips, and I like that sometimes social media brings this up, where it's like you see random clips of things where you never thought in your life, and then you're like, okay, cool. But like, yeah, I've seen clips, and listen, that's a committed actor right there. But if someone came to me and I'm already Jim Carrey at its peak, I've done films, I'm doing great, I would be like, no, can we find something else to do? But that he was probably super committed, and I'm like, good, because if they asked Bryan Tobin, the AKA actor, if I was that famous, I'd be like, can I just play like someone in the background, like, just.
Can you just like paint it on like in post? Like I don't need to wear that.
Yeah. When you look back at the All American Rejects, just your career in general, like what are some real highlights for you in terms of just, I don't know, they could be personal, they could be band related, they could be a little bit of like, hey, neither or, I actually got this thing going on the go and this is what my highlight is.
I mean, we've been so fortunate, and there's been so many. A lot of them feel like it wasn't real, or it feels like it was somebody else's life. And I'm like, like we got to do this thing called the Rock Honors, where we played a Def Leppard song for Def Leppard, and Queen was there, Kiss was there. It was insane. Like we had no business being there, but we got to be there, and that was certainly a surreal experience. And I look back on that and I'm like, wait, did that happen, or was that like some weird dream? Now just doing what I do and just being more like studio focused, highlights for me was, the people that we got to work with, on a professional level, when creating and making music. Those are the things that I reference the most now and just remember the most, and are just have the most like aha kind of like moments where things click. But I mean, we got to travel to some great places. We got to, just see stuff I never thought I'd get to see. I don't know. That's one of those things where there's just so much, it's just mush in there. Yeah. And one day somebody will say something and jog a memory, and I'll have to like recount it, not to like brag or tell a story. It's like, oh, I need to say this so that I remember it and remember that it's real and that it actually happened, and maybe that will buy me 15 more years of memory out of it.
That's fair. I want to ask, because before we kind of wrap it up with other things here, like now you might not know this or whatever, but I hold on, let me see if I can pull it up on my phone. But I think it was an interview that I believe Tyson did, and okay, here it is. I think I got it here. He mentioned this. It was like, without all the politics that come into play when signed to a major label, like the process of, like, you know, the label paying like 20, 40 stations to play music and whatnot. But I think it's interesting because that was a clip that I thought was interesting, or a little, I guess, a snippet that he said. But he also mentioned recently, like when someone asked him, do the All American Rejects, will they like play more music or create more music? And he was like, at this point, I don't think so. And I was like, all right. Like, I'm guessing you've had these discussions as a band, but I feel like there's fans that are probably out there like, how dare you, Tyson? Can you just give us a little bit of hope? But like, in terms of, I want to ask you with the record label side and that, like, when he's talking about the politics of that stuff, like, now maybe you don't have a response. That's totally fine. But like, did you find that when you were with the record label, like sometimes they would be telling you, how about we release this song? Or can you keep grinding? We want more tunes.
As we got older, we kind of started to realize some of the politics and just some of the business that went behind it. When we first started, we were kids. It was almost like we weren't aware, or we didn't notice. It's kind of like, you know, if you're a kid and your parents aren't like telling you that like one of them lost their job or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, they're like, the record label's not going to tell us every bit of business and politics that's going on. They're just going to try to either guide us or just make the decision, you know, on their own, whatever. But as we got older, you know, and we also got a little more influence, I guess, as to what this next single should be or whatever. We weren't always right. I remember we wanted to release Move Along first, but Jimmy Iovine was set on It Has to Be Dirty Little Secret. And we thought Move Along was the better song, so why not release it first? But he had a game plan, and he was right. We wanted to release a song called Wind Blows After Gives You Hell. It was a ballad. Like, the label wanted to do something different. But at that point, we had influence, and we were like, nope, release the ballad. Terrible idea. Anything having to do with like paying radio stations and like that, like I wasn't aware of any of that going on. I've heard stories, but like, the artist wouldn't be involved in that, and they wouldn't tell the artist if that was ever a thing.
I think it was funny because they had like T-Pain on a radio station. Now, it could have been recently, could have been a few years ago, but he was talking about like the world of TikTok and social media. And he's like, at one point, you would literally have to have so much money or so much bank, because you would then have to go to the like radio stations and be like, all right, I've got a new song out. Here's money, push it to play. But now it's almost like someone can go on TikTok, and like once that song becomes trending, then there's people that will phone radio stations, if they still do that, but they'll be like, how come you guys don't play this song? And they're like, okay, now we're getting this song requested. We need to find a way to put this on. Or the song just becomes so trendy that the radio stations are like, well, we want them to listen to our radio station, so we might as well start playing this song. Right.
Yeah. Things have to become like part of the zeitgeist, or they have to become a meme first. Almost like, and like so many, like, in order to, whether it's getting radio play or getting a record label to notice you, they want to know your social stats, and they want to know, you know, how many followers you have on TikTok, etc. Like, man, I can't imagine being an artist right now.
Have you been on Instagram or socials recently where some things that are trendy, you're kind of like, how is that trendy? And then a really good interview where, like, you know, a conversation just gets lost. I've gone on YouTube and like gone down to the rabbit hole, and I'm like, man, this is a really good clip, but how come it has less views than this frog that sounds like he's barking? And I'm like, that does not make sense. I feel bad for like the act that comes on, and it's like,
same with music. There's some really great songs that nobody ever gets to hear, and there's some crap that we hear way too much. But it's the way it goes. You just got to keep doing your thing and just make yourself happy.
That's going to do it for this episode of Tobin Tonight. Our thanks to Nick Wheeler for coming on to the show. Remember, you can find past, present, and future episodes on TobinTonight.com, Spotify, and iTunes. Follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and leave a comment or two. For Tobin and myself, this is Jacob saying thank you for listening and good night.